Hello everyone, I'm Theo Hartzell. I just want to make a quick video about the genealogy of Jesus Christ in relation to two individuals named Salathiel and Zerubbabel, or Zorobabel if you're looking at it in the Greek. The reason is because when people look at the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, these names appear, Salathiel and Zerubbabel, and they think that these lines of Joseph and Mary ended up coming back together into one family through these two individuals. Well, I've already made a detailed video about this going through the genealogy. I want to grab a couple of video clips, bring those back in. I'll come right back in to finish up the video. Which leads me to one of the main things that I want to say and to give you a takeaway out of this video. Is when it comes to studying genealogy, the genetics of a family, studying the blood, the bloodline, the DNA, who the real literal father is. When it comes to a genealogy and studying the bloodlines, why would you trace a bloodline of a stepfather, of someone who is not even blood related? The answer is when it comes to tracing blood and DNA, you do not trace the stepfather or someone who is not related. As a perfect example, when it comes to David, Bathsheba, and Uriah, you know the story. If I was tracing the bloodline, and we actually are in these genealogies, but if you were tracing the bloodline of David and David's children, and you're wanting to find out who the blood DNA-bearing parents of the child of adultery that died, who its parents are, you would not run over here and start tracing the bloodline of Uriah. Why? Uriah was not involved. Uriah's not the father. Uriah wasn't even in town, not even in the same country. Uriah was not the father of the child. Uriah is not in the bloodline DNA whatsoever. He was not even involved whatsoever. I'm trying to make that plain. So when it comes to tracing a genealogy and bloodlines and DNA, you do not trace stepfathers. So let me ask you this. Why would you want to trace Joseph? And the answer is you do not even need to trace Joseph because he's a stepfather and is not even involved for all intents and purposes in determining whether a child is the fruit of David's loins, whether it's the seed of David's loins, whether it's a child and an offspring of David. You cannot trace the bloodline of Joseph whatsoever to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. And I know I'm wound up, but it's because I've got to get you to understand, for all of you people running around, going over and over about this line of Joseph, it does not matter. And biblically, you are incorrect because Joseph is a stepfather and is not even blood related. There is no DNA relation transferring to Jesus because Joseph is not the physical father of Jesus Christ. And therefore, I don't care what blood Joseph has got in him before, because Jesus Christ is not his son. And so I don't care how many kings you want to try to tie Joseph in. If he did not cause the birth of Jesus, his line doesn't even matter in the first place as far as producing a child from the loins of David and the seed of David and the offspring and descendants of David, which means that the child must have come from Mary, linking back into David. Now I'm going to transition and start talking about the genealogies and breaking those down. And I'm going to start off with the genealogy in Matthew for a moment. Now, please listen to me because this is all very, very important. But when you look at Matthew's genealogy, from David to Joseph, only listed 27 names. In fact, he omitted some people. But to make sure that I'm staying accurate to the scriptures, I'm going to include the ones that Matthew left out, whether on purpose or whatever, I don't know. But I'm going to include those names, which will take Matthew's list to 31 names. That's going to be important. And then when you end up bringing in Luke's genealogy, Luke actually lists 42 separate people, 42 generations from David all the way to Joseph. So Matthew has 31 generations, and then Luke's has 42. And something I want to mention about that and just simply explain is you might say, well, why is there 31 versus 42? Let me explain it this way. When the children of Israel came out of Egypt, Moses caused the people to be numbered. And the tribe of Judah was numbered, for example, and they had 74,600 people. And then at the exact same time, the tribe of Manasseh was counted, and they had 32,200 people. And in other words, the tribe of Judah was more than double the size of Manasseh. And you might say, well, how could that be possible? What happened? Well, think about people in your own life. You know people that got started having children when they were 17, 18 years old, and then they had 6, 7, 8, 9 children, who then in turn got started having children when they were 17 or 18 years old. Then you also know somebody else that didn't start having children till they were 30 or 40 years old, had one child. That child didn't have any children till they were 35 or 40 years old. In that scenario, who do you think is going to have the more children? The ones that are getting started faster and having greater numbers, and they are getting started having a family and getting going faster. The reason I'm saying that is when you look at the genealogies and realize there's 31 generations in one family and 42 generations in the other family, you will realize it's because they are two completely different and separate families. One is taking their time and not having children as frequently, but the other one is having lots of children and having them very frequently. Now, something that I will mention about the genealogies is we see that they both start with David. However, when we get to the very next person, they are already separating and going in two different directions. Why? Because these are two different families that we are looking at. And we're going to see this as we go. Because I don't care if any names ever appear down below. When you've already got them separating right here at Nathan and Solomon, you've got two different families. Two completely different families. Just like I am completely different than my brother. And we can name all of our children the same names or whatever we want to do, but me and my brother are different. So even though we have the same father, our lines would be completely different because we are already separating right here at David. Now let me explain something to you about these genealogies, comparing them. And let's just look at Matthew and Luke's lines together. And David being number 1. David had a son named Solomon. Solomon had a son named Rehoboam. Then there was Abiah. Then there was Asa and Jehoshaphat. Going over to Luke's line, which traces a different family line through Nathan, you will see that David had a son named Nathan. Nathan had a son named Mattith. Mattith had a son named Menon. Menon had a son named Mela. Mela had a son named Eliakim. The reason I'm highlighting this to you is because I want to make abundantly clear that you understand that Solomon is a brother to Nathan, and Nathan is a brother to Solomon. They are brothers. But then when you go to the very next generation, those two men, Rehoboam and Mathath, are going to be first cousins. In other words, they are cousins of the first generations. Then when you go to their sons, Rehoboam had a son named Abiah. Then on the other side, Mathan's son was Menon. So these two individuals, Abiah and Menon, are now second cousins. They are cousins to the second generation. The next generation, they are third cousins. The next generation, they are fourth cousins. And it goes on down the list all the way down. And so by the time you get to somebody like Salathiel, you are all the way down to like a 20th generation cousin. Now, something I also want to clear up is the confusion surrounding two individuals in both genealogies named Salathiel and Zerubbabel, or Zorobabel if you're looking in the Greek. But I want to clear up confusion about this because people say that both of these lines ended up merging back together as one line in Salathiel and Zorobabel, but that is not the truth, and these are not the same individuals whatsoever, and I'm about to show you and prove that to you. But one thing that I want to mention first is that we can calculate by numbers about how many years they are apart. And this is just a rough guesstimate. This is not completely 100% accurate because you would have to go through every individual and their exact birth date and when they die. But this is to give you a general guesstimate. But watch what I've got to show you here. Now, we already saw in the genealogy of Matthew that Matthew listed 27 names from David to Joseph. And I went ahead and included the ones that Matthew excluded to incorporate the full total of 31 generations of Solomon's line, Solomon being the son of David. There's 31 generations. Now, the time period from King David to Joseph and Jesus is a 1,000-year period. So when you take the 1,000-year period and divide it by 31 generations, you end up getting an average generational gap of 32.3 years. In other words, there's 32.3 years between each generation in the line of Solomon, the family tree of Solomon. Then you realize that Salathiel is number 20 in that line. You take the average generational gap of 32.3 years times Salathiel at number 20, so times 20, gives you a grand total of 646 years. Then we jump over to Luke's line, and we take the same 1,000-year period from King David to Joseph and Jesus. We divide it by Luke's 42 generations. We get an average generational gap of 23.8 years per generation. When you take the 23.8 year generational gap, and Salathiel is at number 22 in the list, you get the number 523.6 years. So in Solomon's line, the average generational gap getting to Salathiel at number 20 is 646 years. Going over to Nathan's family line, Salathiel is at number 22. Generational gap of 23.8 gives you a total of 523.6 years. What is my point? And I know that this is not 100% accurate, but what I'm trying to show you is when you take the number of generations and how many years they were separated by, you realize that these two men, Salathiel and Zerubbabel, are over 120 years apart. They are not the same individuals whatsoever. And not only that, when you go back up into their lines, you realize that their fathers are different. Their grandfathers are different. Their great-grandfathers are different. And every one of them are different. And when you've got 19 generations of different people, I don't care if some names end up looking the same way down here, because when you've got a family 19 generations removed, I don't care if their name is the same, they are not the same people because they are 19 generations removed. They are cousins to the 19th generation. Now, the reason I want to highlight this generational gap difference and the reason that Salathiel and Zerubbabel are not the same people whatsoever is because it helps establish the fact that these two family lines are indeed two different families. And anybody with common sense can understand and know that these are two completely separate and different families, one through Solomon, one through Nathan. Thereby, they are completely different families. So there is no way that you can say that both lines are through Joseph because they are separate all the way back up here at right under King David. And so on Solomon's line, you've got 30 plus generations of differences. And then in Luke's gospel, you've got 40 plus generations of different people involved. There is absolutely no way that the lines in Matthew and Luke are of Joseph. Absolutely no way. And if you try to maintain that, you are incorrect and out of line, misinterpreting scriptures, and you need to just stop it because You are not interpreting Scripture correctly. What I'm trying to show you is that although the names Salathiel and Zerubbabel both repeat in Matthew's account and Luke's account, they are not the same people or individuals at all whatsoever. Why? Because their fathers were different, the grandfathers, the great-grandfathers, and going all the way back up to where the line split below David at Nathan and Solomon. There is no way that these lines are the same people because there is 18, 19, 20 generations of different fathers, meaning that they are completely different people. This is no different than even people you know in your own life probably right now, where somebody has children, grandchildren, or whatever, and they end up reusing the same names down below. Now, it doesn't mean that they're the same people because they might be fourth cousins removed or eighth cousins removed. And just because you see the same names being used down in the genealogy does not mean in any way that it is talking about the same person, because the fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers are different. And the more they go different up the line, they're completely different families. So you may have someone, for example, in your family, and there are some cousins that may have the same name like Bill or William or John, some very common names. It does not mean that they are the same people because the genealogies and the lines are different. The name does not mean it's the same person. So whenever you look at the name Salathiel and Zerubbabel, do not be confused thinking that these are the same consecutive people in Matthew and in Luke, because their fathers are different, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, all the way up the lineage, all the way back to where it split at Nathan and Solomon. So I hope that clears up some confusion for you and helps make the genealogy of Jesus make more sense. God bless you. I love you, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. I love you. Bye-bye.